Yeah, so as Jenny said, I actually have an exhibition at the moment at the Wittox Gallery about, it's called Rise for Bielsa, and it's all about the oil spills and the effects on the environment and the health of the people down in that part of the world, in the Delta region of Nigeria. But I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about like my philosophy around portraiture and advocating for change in with the work that I do. Who's a photographer in the room, by the way? Just to see. Great, we got a lot of photographers in the room. Great. So I'm in basically with friends, aren't I? I'm with friends. Excellent. So we'll go over my philosophy, but I'd love to kind of get some like questions at the end if you have any, like, because I also want to learn from you guys in the audience as well. So what I'm going to go over a little bit today is I'll put my book down for a second so I don't have to carry it the whole time. I'm going to go over like 3 main points today, which is going to be 2 lessons I learned from my favorite dreamers, and exploring the concept of empowerment, and also book creation and the concept, okay? So this is me, nice picture of me. Thought I'd start off with that. I'll move on swiftly. So I work as, obviously, a photographer, but I also work as an Akademie tutor for the brand Leica. If anyone's ever heard of Leica cameras, we just, yeah, produce nice cameras and we teach people how to use them. But my background, my parents come from a place called Ghana in West Africa. Anyone heard of Ghana, West Africa? Oh, great, a lot of people. Great. I always think like people don't really know about it, but they do. Great. That's where I come from. That's my parents. That's where they come from. Ghana used to be a colony of Great Britain. We gained our independence in 1957. That's the Queen with the President Kwame Nkrumah. These are my beautiful parents, and with their fresh faces, you know, before they had us and we aged them. But it looked like they had a good time. But my dad, for instance, like he grew up in colonial Ghana, right? So he was born in like 1937, something like that. And so he grew up, he was almost like 19 or 20 when Britain kind of relinquished power on Ghana. And so he kind of grew up in a time where he didn't have much, right? He used to tell us when we were kids, whenever we'd complain about getting the new Nike trainers, he'd be like, I didn't wear shoes till I was 16 years old. And we'd be like, oh, okay, but can we have these, you know? It didn't really work that well on us. But he was my first big dreamer. He was my favorite first big dreamer, because when he was younger, he had a vision, right? You know, he came from like a poor village, like I said, didn't wear shoes for a long time. But when Britain was leaving Ghana, a lot of opportunities opened up in across industries, and they formed the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. Well, that's a quote that I like. All men and women of action are dreamers, because my dad was very much an action taker. He would just seize opportunity and he would just go for it whenever it kind of arrived. So he got a job early on working with the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, quite a young age, and he started off as like a kind of trainee intern, and then like in 1960, all these interns that were hired to kind of be part of this new take over the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, there was like a fire that happened in one of the studios, and a lot of them couldn't basically get any work for a long time. So he was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to come to the UK. And he came to learn filmmaking in a place called the Colonial Film School in Soho. Google it. I I couldn't find a picture of it. But he came to the UK, and he managed to kind of work for that. For about a year or 2 years, he was working not working, sorry, was learning how to make films. But he was fortunate enough, he's quite an ambitious guy, right? So he managed to kind of get himself an internship at the end of that, working for the BBC. And he worked for the BBC in the 1960s, worked really, really hard, became an editor, I think one of the first African editors at the BBC at the time. Really interesting kind of story. My mum is meticulous when it comes to keeping our like history and stuff like that. She keeps all these cool albums, like when they were young, and I'm like, wow, they used to kind of travel to different parts of Europe, and I kind of thought they were just kind of like boring parents, but they actually did some stuff, right? Basically them in their flares and their kind of, you know, their hot pants and things like that. It's that, you know, my mum is such a gorgeous woman. I should tell her that more often, actually. But what happened is my dad, after working in the UK for a while, got headhunted to come back to Ghana, and he went back to Ghana and actually started to rise up the ranks in the film industry and became like editor-in-chief of Ghana Films, which is amazing for him, from coming from pretty much nothing to doing that. But then the country went through a lot of turmoil. There were at least 4 military coups from the space of 1966 to 1981, right? That's after post-independence, right? So my father, what tends to happen when you have a military coup, by the way, is that they kind of want to silence the media first, because the media is obviously the voice of the people and things like that. So Dad got a lot of intimidation and kind of didn't feel like he was quite safe in Ghana. A lot of people fled Ghana at that time, and went to live in Milton Keynes and places like that, and different parts of Europe. But he ended up fleeing and coming to the UK, right? And this was a bit of a revelation to me, because I thought Dad was just like, he came to the UK, we were born here, that was the dream. But it wasn't actually the dream. His dream was he was having a really good life in Ghana, and then military coups kind of messed everything up for a lot of people. But then again, there was quite a bit of corruption going on in the government. So, you know, judge history by the outcomes, whatever. But, you know, and a lot of kind of prominent people were kind of killed and assassinated and things like that. So it was a time where everyone kind of felt like, oh, was I going to be next and things like that. So Dad left and he came to the UK, and he came to live here, and he married Mum, because Mum was actually over here studying to be a secretary. But something happened with Dad, actually. When he came to the UK, he started from zero again. Right? That's something that's really interesting, because through the work that I've done with migrant refugees, I've realized that, like, when you really think about where they've come from, some of them have had incredible careers in their countries, but because of destabilizing of the economy, because of war and things like that, it's almost like you lose everything. You lose your status, you lose your money, and you pretty much have to come and build from scratch. So Dad became this guy that was a little bit kind of low energy, not very inspired, at times quite negative. And, you know, now in today's language, we might say that he had some kind of mental health in terms of like maybe some depression, things like that. But they didn't have the language back then to kind of talk about it. So we'd always be like, Dad, man, why can't you be more energetic? Why can't you be more? And then my family would say, oh my gosh, your father, he used to dress like this. He used to travel here. And I'd be like, really? Like, I didn't see that. Like, I didn't see that version of him. Right? But this is us outside our North London home in 2010. But he was quite old there. He passed away in 2021. But yeah, Dad, I never felt like I really knew Dad, because Dad, his dream kind of died a little bit, and I learned a really important lesson about that from his life. But I did learn a key lesson from him when I studied his life, was that he always seized opportunity as a young person. He wasn't afraid to travel and to try things. And that was like my first lesson. I was like, okay, do you know what? To succeed, I got to just overcome fear, or put fear to one side to one degree, and just say yes to life. Has anyone ever had that kind of breakthrough in their life about just seizing opportunity? Or is it just me? Just me. I'm the only one who seizes opportunity? A few people, yeah, there you go. Good lesson, right? And I'm going to introduce my second big dreamer. So my second big dreamer is a guy called Oswald Boateng. And who here has heard of a guy called Oswald Boateng before? A few people, right? Yeah. He used to be called the Peacock of Savile Row, right? He'd always wear these elaborate suits, and, you know, he's very tall, I think 6'4" or something like that, slim, dark skin. And he was impressive to me. He was so impressive to me. I remember one day, it was, I think, after university or something, I remember being up late one evening, and it might have been like 10 or something like that, and I was just kind of flicking through the channels trying to kill time before bedtime. Mum was kind of flicking all the lights off and locking the doors, and Dad was snoring in the back. And I used to see this man come up on the screen. I didn't know who he was. You know, he had dark skin, he had like emerald green suit, looked incredible. I said, Mum, who the hell is this guy? Like, you know, he looks amazing. He said, that's Oswald Boateng. I was like, wow, okay. He's from Ghana, like you. I was like, really? Oh my gosh, like a role model, right? And he instantly became like a bit of a role model for me, right? And then, you know, if you're not familiar with him, once again, beautiful suits he makes, does suits for like movies that you've seen, well-known movies, celebrities and things like that. But one thing that really happened to me after I saw him on television, it took about 4 years of me kind of setting a bit of a vision for myself before I actually started working with him and his team. I just would find ways to go and say hi, or find ways to go and say, oh, hi, things like that. And then eventually they were like, yeah, we'll come and work with us, and we'll kind of, we'll give you our clothes, and things like that. And I got opportunity just by kind of being around and being really hungry. Are there any kind of young people in this room? Any young creative people in this room? Yep. Yeah, someone's like, oh, I don't know if I am. You are. It's your early success, I think, will come from just being available and being quite hungry, right? And soaking so much in from people that you think are inspirational, And I think one thing I found was that if you have an aim to just kind of almost like serve them and serve their mission in some way, and they see that you're quite consistent, they will give you a lot of access, right? And I was the kind of person that I was always there. I was always like, hi, I'm here to kind of like, see help with something. And he eventually started to trust me, and I started shooting all his kind of behind the scenes fashion reportage. I'd be so hungry. I'd be like, oh, you haven't got any pictures of your shirts. Do you want me to come take, I'd be that kind of guy, right? And he'd be like, okay, fine, take some pictures, not going to pay you, and I would do that. And I just kind of like be kind of honing my craft a little bit by just trying lots of different things. So he'd give me stuff, and then got a campaign, shot a campaign for him. But one time we had this really interesting conversation, because I started to build trust with the company, and they started taking me around the world with them on fashion weeks and stuff. I was like, ooh, this is fun, right? But for just a reality check though, like Oswald didn't know my name for like 2 years. Like I'd always be there. Like that picture I showed you, that's like after. Like I remember when they were going to like traveling around the world, and they're like, oh, we need a photographer. I remember him saying, no, I didn't hear him say it, but the head of design said, oh, let's get the guy with the hat. I was like, okay, that's good for me. Like, as long as I'm getting on a flight, I don't care, right? So I end up just being the guy who wore the hat, and then photographing all their stuff for them. Then we got this great opportunity to go to Moscow, right? And it was right a month after we'd just come back from New York, right? And I remember photographing all the stuff, like being furious. Oh my God, what am I going to photograph? And then I showed him the pictures one day, and he said, Arteh, you've got an eye, but you're not telling any stories with your work. You're not really kind of grabbing something with your work. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm photographing the beginning of the fashion show, the middle, the end. Like, that's a story, right? He was like, no, you got to tell human stories. And I was like, okay. He opened my mind to looking for stories. And who knows that whenever you start to focus on something, it starts to kind of reveal itself to you, right? Your mind just starts to kind of see it everywhere, right? When you set a goal. And that's what happened to me. So we ended up going to Moscow, crazy busy, had hundreds of models come and see us. We had this great space, so we were kind of auditioning all the models, and it was a bit of a crazy time in Russia. And the thing about being in Russia, if you're someone of color in Russia, people actually stare at you. Like they don't just be like that. They're like, like that. And to be fair, whenever I saw another person of color out there, I'd actually do that. Oh. What's your story? Like, I'm here for Fashion Week. What's your story? And then I remember seeing this guy. He came for one of the auditions, right? And there were just like a handful of black models that came for the show. And he was just there sitting down with a book. And I was like, and he wore all this Pan-African jewelry. Like, you can't see it because it's black and white, but he just had colors all over him. And I was like, dude, like, I've been here for like 3 days, and people stare at me like I'm like wearing an elephant costume or something. And you've been here, and he was like, oh, I've been here for 2.5 years. I'm studying things like that. I was like, wow. Like, and then what happened was that I was like, ooh, have I found a story? I was like, oh, have I found a story? Is there a human story here? And I just kind of just stuck close to this guy. I was always kind of photographing whenever he was doing his fittings and things like that. I just always kind of kept kind of close with him. And then learned that he came from a place called Sao Tome and Principe. Anyone ever heard of that? You've heard of that. Have you heard of that? I had not heard of that until. There you go. I'm getting educated on Sao Tome right now. He showed me his passport. I was like, wow, like never heard of this country, island. It's a Portuguese island, right? But he'd kind of moved all the way to Moscow because once again, his family was quite poor, but he managed to get on these scholarships to kind of go to Moscow. So I don't know if you know, but Moscow offers a lot of scholarships to countries to come and study medicine, engineering, and things like that. I didn't know any of this stuff. So I'm like, oh, this is an interesting story, right? Anyway, stuck close with the guy. He ended up being the only black model in the final runway show. So we were there from like a Sunday, and we're going to leave on a Sunday. So what happens is that we were there for literally a week, right? 7 days. And then, so Friday was the fashion show. And then Saturday was the one free day. And then Sunday we're flying back home. So once again, the mentality of seize opportunity. I said, do you know what? I'm not going to tell anybody I'm doing this. I'm just going to get a few people from the team. And I'm going to meet Abdoulaye, that was his name, Abdoulaye Viette. And we went to meet him at his kind of student accommodation. And we created a series with him, took some clothes and like got him there, and we created a series called The Stranger in Moscow. You know, and we just hustled. We're like, everyone's going partying on the Friday, and we're just like, God, let's get some clothes, let's meet him, let's get, you know, driver, and then we went and met him, and then we just took him around to different parts of Moscow, and we said, we're going to create a series. It was a very simple idea, actually. Ended up being like quite, oh, it's gone. The screen gone. Oh, it's back. Great. I went and let it go to sleep. Yeah, we ended up kind of going around and kind of just doing these really interesting images of him. And my mindset was I wanted him as a migrant who obviously didn't feel like he belonged there. He'd tell me stories about, like, I mean, it's kind of crazy out there sometimes, like what happens to people if you're a foreigner. And I'd say I wanted to create images where you felt like you belonged to the establishment, to the faith, to everything out there. So we just kind of went around to these different locations, iconic locations, and just photographed him there, looking quite strong and quite debonair and things like that. And I didn't really realize this, but I was discovering something about how I wanted to create work. Right, I was just kind of trying things. I was like, oh, okay. So I learned from that interaction in Moscow and also from Oswald Boateng that it's important to tell stories that are important to me. If that makes sense. So if stories feel kind of close to you, you know, you should tell those stories, because when you speak about them, you'll speak about them with such energy and such enthusiasm, such kind of experience that you'll be the salesperson, to use one of a better word, of your own work, right? So we ended up coming back to the UK, and didn't tell Oswald I'd shot it. I just went back and edited it and kind of worked on it, came back and showed him, and he was like, oh, wow, we really like these pictures. And he gave me my first exhibition in his flagship store on Savile Row, which was so cool. And then from there, the work was then seen by a curator in America, and then they flew me out to America to exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Photography. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting flown around the world to kind of speak and share my work. That was crazy for me. And the work ended up going to lots of different magazines, and I was like, man, I'm getting like, just getting like hitting something right with this, right? So once again, that lesson was kind of really honed into me. And I thought to myself, okay, how can I capitalize on this? I want to tell more stories like this. It's almost quite addictive. I remember like the private view of my exhibition at Oswald's show. I remember just speaking for like 3 hours. I was like, oh my gosh, I've never spoken like this about something. I was like, I'm onto something. So once again, that was something that really was a lesson for me. But I realized that if I wanted to continue to do this, I'd learned a few lessons below that first lesson. It's important to earn trust with people. And it's also important to be intentional about how I'm creating work, right? Anyone here create like projects about people? Yeah, great. That's so good. Because when you're communicating about your project, like people want to know, like, you know, why should I work with you? Like, what are you up to? Like, what's your intention behind what you're doing? Like, and that's natural, right? No one wants to be exploited, right? So it's important to earn that trust, and earning that trust comes down to how you interact with that person, your integrity. Do you do what you say you're going to do? And like, they want to know where you're going. Like, where are you going with this project? Like, so I should devote time to it. So I learned that that's how I could continue to kind of build on what I've learned. And then, so then that kind of led me onto this journey of like, okay, I love the idea of Abdoulaye feeling empowered in the images that I was creating. But I was like, what does it actually mean to be empowered, right? What does it mean to empower somebody else? So slight trigger warning. I'm going to show some images of war, okay? So in 2015, this is when I kind of came back from America, doing all this really cool stuff. I was like, I want to keep the project going. I want to keep building on this project. And I kind of started becoming a lot more sensitized to what was going on in Europe, right? Do you remember what's going on in Europe, like 2010, 2015, and ongoing? It's lots of kind of turmoil, Yemen, Syria, like lots of different places, right? Libya, obviously that's Africa, but lots of migration was happening, right? And I actually changed the word on here. I said pressing refugee emergency because I used to write refugee crisis, right? But then I realized that actually people who are refugees don't like that word because they don't want to be considered a crisis, right? No one wants to be considered a crisis. So I changed that word because someone actually gave me some feedback on that. Okay, so these are all from various photographers, and the destruction that was happening in Syria. I think we're quite familiar with some images like this, right? This is called the Yarmouk refugee camp in Damascus, right? This is like, I mean, it's actually described as living hell, right? I can only imagine what it's like to live in a place like that, right? But these are some statistics. So we had incredible amounts of people moving, being displaced in Europe and Africa and things like that. Germany took obviously a huge brunt of that intake. You had the United Kingdom, you had Hungary and Sweden taking a lot of people, Italy and France and places like that. And this is kind of what it looked like in 2015. It was, you had Islamic State, you had Kurdish fighters, you had Syrian armed forces, lots of the, you can imagine what it must be like. Well, actually, we can't really imagine unless you're there in a place like that. But then I also started to notice that words that were being used in the media were quite dehumanizing words, right? People would be described as a swarm, right? Be described as war over migrants, like they're just one thing, right? Or taking our jobs, things like that. These are kind of words that are designed to kind of agitate an audience, agitate a population, like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And it's just void of context, right? So I started noticing this, and I also started noticing how imagery was being shared as well in the media. It's always of like a mass, a monolith of happening, rather than thinking about an individual, right? So you've got things like, once again, language like swarm, which it's quite subtle in how it's done, right? But then the crazy thing about when you use language like that is that human beings, when I'm faced with average that you're here, it's hard to harm you because I know your name, you're a person, you have a life, things like that. But when you start to describe people as an insect or as something that is that you want to step on or you're trying to eradicate, then it allows human beings to do things that they would not normally do to other human beings, right? And if you've ever heard of like the Rwanda genocide in the early 90s, they used the Tutsis were basically trying to exterminate the Hutu. Sorry, Hutu were trying to exterminate the Tutsi, and Tutsi were a smaller population in the country, but they were described as cockroaches, right? And you can do things to a cockroach that you won't do to a person with a name, right? And it's a very subtle thing, but when you start to see things like that in the media, you understand that it's a process of dehumanizing a group of people, right? In Nazi Germany, a very kind of horrible thing that happened, Jews were referred to as rats and things like that. So it's been used over and over and over again to kind of move people to an opinion or a way of thinking, right? So it's very important to kind of just pay attention to things like this. So it starts with dehumanizing people. It starts with language and rhetoric. And once we're more aware of that, we can start to kind of push back on that when we start to see it come through, right? And we see it all the time. Things like I said, overrun by, they taking our crisis, things like that. These are very dehumanizing words, right? And then it's usually followed by imagery that kind of supports that narrative, right? So once again, I was becoming so much more engaged and so much more educated about this. And over a while, I created a little bit of a formula in my own mind, and it's called LUVS, which is loves, right? And it comes down to listening to people. It comes down to understanding their situation, valuing what is shared with you without trying to without trying to put your own interpretation on their story, on them, just listening and sharing and accepting, and sharing individual single stories. And I'd learned that through the work with Abdoulaye. People were like, oh my gosh, we want to hear the story of migration. Like, who is this guy? Who is it? and it wasn't like, whereas if I just put like a thousand people in a picture, you know, it would have been like, oh, there wouldn't have been that much interest in the individual. So there's power in sharing individual stories. Okay, cool. So this is the amazing Domitila Barros, and she actually migrated from from the favelas of Brazil. So if you've ever heard of the favelas of Brazil, are very kind of quite dangerous places, lots of killings and crime and things like that. Her parents were incredible. They created like this street child charity where kids could come to and kind of learn and study. And I met her through a mutual friend, right? Because she'd managed to travel over, but she was trying to succeed in life, but getting a lot of resistance in her life. So we went to Germany and photographed her. Once again, kind of me using that loves approach, listening to her, understanding her, valuing her, and then sharing her individual story. And this is a little bit of an excerpt from her when we were doing our interviews. We interviewed a lot of people for the book, right?
Living abroad, proving yourself every day, fighting for acceptance, alone, leaving your beliefs, your family, your socialization behind, and relearn everything new. This is the hardest part for me.
Yes.
Because I always felt like I do not want to change. But it's impossible not to change because it's a part of growth. You learn things, you get some materials that you can use in your everyday to be faster, go farther, whatever. And this is very hard. This conversation between you, yourself, and your values.
Wow.
This I did, as I say, I did 3 years therapy. I meditate every day, and it's not even to be calm. It's just to stay sane because I know what's right is wrong. I know what my purpose on life is. But every morning to stay up in Berlin, to get that love vibration, that positivity, that light, and go out sharing and fighting, improving yourself and building and creating. This is harder.
This is energy. This is constant putting out energy. Yeah.
And and this is why I always am very happy when I connect with people like you, people like Shannon, that at least, even if you are in a different country and your dad comes from Ghana, not from Brazil, at least we are at the same path.
Mm.
And this helps me to stay there because sometimes I think I'm crazy. Why?
Yeah.
It's hard to fight alone. It's easier to fight in a tribe, you know?
I say like it's so powerful because like you made an important statement there. Like I'm trying to stay like who I am. I'm trying to like retain that. But at the same time, as I enter into these different environments, these different cities or whatever, I have to keep somehow adapting to how things work here because the ultimate goal is to be the success to then go and, help those who need that lift up as well. So you're kind of really trying to serve that version of yourself that maybe didn't have someone like you. And it's just that, and I think that's so powerful, having that vision in your mind that, do you know what? Like, and you said before, it's like sometimes I feel crazy. It's like I'm dreaming about this, and no one else is dreaming. Everyone just dreams about having a 9-to-5 job and retiring, and you're thinking about something
creating a new reality. I believe on it, and I know it may sound crazy, arrogant, whatever. I believe I am one of the chosen.
I love
as you, as so many people that I always meet, like we met 2 times live, and it is. And I really feel like the call, and I feel that it's possible to create a society more fair, more united, more love.
That's the end of that. Like I did lots of interviews like that, and over time I started to realize that I wanted to talk to people, migrant refugees, who had a vision for their life. Not just like migrant refugees, but I wanted to find people who actually were like going somewhere that I could kind of put on a bit of a platform, right? Domitila is one of those people. She's an incredible person. She has a business called She Is From the Jungle, and she makes like swimwear and also jewelry, but it's made by women in the favelas in Brazil. And then it's sold, and then they can basically make an income and be around, so they can be around their families because a lot of the kids get into street crime and stuff like that. So this is a woman she's also a green influencer. She's just incredible. Well, this was like, I think we talked we met in like 2015, and she's just someone who's always going for something. In 2022, she just kept going. So that's last year. She became Miss Germany 2022. And now she's like she's just blown up. She's like in everywhere. She's got like, but she's that kind of person that was like, I feel the call. I feel like I'm going somewhere. And it's like years later, I'm like, congratulations, Domitila. Like you're famous. So she does reply to my messages still. But yeah, she's an incredible person. And there's loads of incredible people in the book like that. There's one lady called Chris Ann Jarrett in the book who was starting like a kind of grassroots charity, and she recently got like an OBE or something like that from the Queen. So I started to kind of realize I wanted to find people like that, right, who were going somewhere. And they were really interesting to me. So once again, there's power in the single story, right? Sharing that single story. People relate more. It hits the heart more. So I realized that if I wanted to empower people, I had to actually start to dial back a little bit of the damage that's being done in terms of the media and the wording, things like that. So I realized that the first part of like humanizing people is just to start with a name. Right? It's to learn someone's name, use their name in the work that you're creating, not unknown something. It's like, no, Abdoulaye Vayet or Domitila Barros or whatever, whoever's name. You emphasize the name of the person. And then also start to try to use descriptions that are relatable to us, that make them feel more human to us, right? So it's like, Abdoulaye Vayet, a friend, a brother, a student, a future leader. Like, these are connotations that we put with people when we say, oh, there's potential here. And we all have potential, don't we? Right? We all have that potential, but some people don't get given that when they're described in the media. And that sadly restricts their ability to thrive in a society. When we think less of people, we disregard their humanity or their potential. We start to give them less opportunities. We start to provide less healthcare options for them. It's a trickle down effect, right? So it's something that we have to be really conscious of when we're sharing people's stories, right? So what does it mean to truly empower someone? To give power or authority to empowerment is the ability to access and control resources and people, to make stronger or more confident. This is how we empower ourselves and how we empower other people. So I was doing my research and I realized that I could do two approaches, right? I'd already started the first approach. I can shoot people and tell their stories. That was one approach. The second approach was I could facilitate the creative process for other people to tell their own stories. It takes a little bit of harder work, right, and building different skill set, but there's options to do that, right? So, but the question that came to my mind, who's ever thought of doing a project and thought, can I do that project? Like, who am I to do that project? Anyone ever felt like that? I think a lot of people, right? Like, who am I to do it? Why should I do it? Things like that. I had the same kind of thought process. And, because I'm not like some slick politician. I'm not David Beckham. I'm not some like social influencer like Domitila with like 1 million followers. So I was like, what can I do? And I realized that what I can do is I can use my skill set and I can just start telling stories. Simple as that, right? Just start. And that's what I did. So I started by also getting clear about who I wanted to actually tell, whose stories I wanted to tell. That's an important point as well. What stories do you actually want to tell? You don't want to be too general. You want to start to kind of narrow it down, right? And it gives you access. So I kind of came up with a little bit of a system of like niching down. And I've done that also with the Rise for Bielsa campaign as well. Niching down who I'm trying to talk to, right? So rather than saying refugees and migrants, which is huge, right? I'd go young refugees and migrants between 17 and 30 years old. Great, okay, cool. And then young refugees and migrants with compelling aspirations to contribute and give back to society. So kind of niching down at least 3 tiers. It gives you, it opens it up to you, right? Because you're going to find at least there's someone in your network, existing in your network, that has some link to something that you want to do, right? It's easier when you narrow it down. So that's what I did. People were like, Arteh, you need to talk to this person, you need to meet this person. And I was like, great. Like they knew what I was doing. I put the message out there and people were doing that. So how do we represent people in an empowering way? I thought that was a really interesting thing to think about as well, because I'd seen a lot of images that I didn't like, that I felt like weren't empowering to people. So I started to do some research. I said, okay, one key thing is to build on their current skill set. What do they do? Like, what do they do well? Think about that when you're taking a photograph, right? Focus on their strengths rather than their weaknesses. Emphasize contribution. because we respect people who contribute to a society. Consider the environment that you place them in, because that tells part of their story. You know, if they're in, once again, it might be part of the truth that they don't have a lot of resources and they're not very wealthy. But think about that. What is that connotation? What is that sharing with the rest of the world? You know, when you take a picture of 1,000 people or 100 people on a boat, all crouched down, tired, looking at, it says something, right? It says something different to they have potential. It says something different, right? So be intentional about how you're sharing these stories. Reveal a truth or story about your subject. Oh my gosh, his name has just got out of my head right now. That's so terrible. Syed, that's it, Syed. Syed was into fighting. He was massive into Muay Thai and things like that. So we were like, okay, let's focus on things that you're good at. We're in Berlin, we did that, got the gloves, thing that. And then he felt confident, he felt good when he was doing that. And that was my approach, always listening to people, understanding them, valuing what they had to give and sharing their single story. And then gain consent, clearly articulate your intention when capturing your subjects. I think we're all kind of familiar with that. We want them to be part of the process, right? Not that we are capturing them, like they're part of the process. They want their image like this, they're happy with it. That's how I felt anyway. That's just one approach. So I started using my network. We reached out to people. Before I know it, I was traveling all over Europe and like photographing people one after the other and kind of building up this series of work. And this is an interesting family. So this is Halil and Judy. Halil and Judy are from Syria. And they're in the book, they're siblings. And Halil, for instance, has a very interesting story. He's actually got the longest story in the book. Because he, at the age of 18 in Syria, if you are not in full-time education, you have to be in the army. Right? If you're not in full-time education, you have to be in the army fighting with the forces, the Syrian forces. And he found himself. He was actually 16 years old when he was in Syria back then. But then he was such a tall guy. If you ever meet, he's really tall. So he would always be harassed by the police about, what are you doing? What's your age? And his family realized that this was a problem and that he'd probably end up getting just drafted into the army. So his father created a plan where they were going to smuggle him out of Syria. And they were from Damascus. So smuggling them out of Syria, and their story is quite like elaborate. But this is kind of his story in the book. It's on page 111, and his caption says, Halil Adabas, 22 years old, from Damascus, Syria. Halil immigrated to London, UK in 2015 when he was 16 years old. He's an advocate for young migrants and refugees and a university engineering student. And his caption is, "My father gave me money and my documents. We wrapped them in a plastic bag and hid them in a secret hole I'd made in the waistband of my jeans. He then said to tell no one. He explained, sometimes people are hurt and even killed if the wrong people know you have money. He then instructed me how to contact him and my mother when I would finally reach a place of safety." So his father was incredibly emotional when he had to take him to Turkey, give his 16-year-old son to a people smuggler, who then put him on a boat and then got to Greece, right? And the thing that's interesting, I'm almost running out of time. So many more things to talk about, but I'll wrap it up. The thing about when you're a migrant, you're trying to get into Europe, and if you cross the Greek border, if your boat is like afloat when they catch you, they'll tow you back to Turkey, right? So they had a plan, and there had a few other people in the kind of boat that when they crossed the border, as soon as they saw police, they'd have to bust the boat, right? So that's what they did. They had to they punctured it, and then they were basically like, oh my God. And then but because they were in Greek water, they were taken to Greece. And he then contacted his mother with a phone that was in a plastic bag that he had. And it's a really interesting story with their story. More images from the book. Mariam from Nigeria. I'll kind of go a little bit faster because I'm running out of time. Ramona from Romania. Her dream was to be a classical violinist, so we kind of captured her story, but with her almost performing in front of a invisible crowd. Arkham from Pakistan, his vision of London and how he wants to help and empower people of color. And it also kind of goes into the work that I do in Nigeria as well. And I go to different parts of Africa to kind of shoot people, and once again focusing on what their contributions are, what they're good at, is really, really important to me. In 2019, we did a whole exhibition for the Rise of Biota campaign, which was all about bringing to attention the environmental damage that's happening out there. Sierra Leone as well. So the last part I want to kind of go into is the facilitating process of how you help people tell their own stories. So what I ended up doing was I ended up kind of contacting a lawyer friend of mine and said, and he did immigration law, and I said, how I need access to some of your clients. He's like, I can't give you access to my clients, so there's confidentiality. So he's like, but I can connect you to a charity. So he connected me to this incredible charity called Quorum, which helped children get homes after being in care. Find care homes, things that after kind of being abandoned or being taken away from their parents, things like that. And I ended up working with this group for about 4 months. And I was being had Leica as an ambassador for Leica. So Leica gave me loads of cameras to give to these young people, and I was like, man, don't drop any of these cameras. I have to take them back afterwards. And they were very, very good. They were so good with the cameras. I just kind of let it go. They had a great time, and they just kind of taking loads of cool photos. And then we kind of coached them how to, create their own portraits, their own portraits that they took. And one key thing that we wanted to give them was this understanding of the law of the mirror. And it's a John Maxwell teaching. And it talks about seeing value in yourself before you can add value to yourself, right? So looking in the mirror, you look in the mirror and you say, what number would I give myself in terms of my ability, potential, things like that. And if you give yourself a decent number, it means you can add more to, I'm worth investing in. And that was what we wanted to give them, because after we'd worked with them for 4 months, we wanted them to be able to continue to go after their dreams and ambitions and things like that, which is something that we really kind of were emphasized on. And we ended up kind of creating this really great exhibition with the young, that's Judy, one of the people in the book, and we exhibited their work at the City Hall. Once again, really lovely images that they took, telling their own stories, which I found really interesting, kind of teaching them how to do that. There's Daryl right there, City Hall. That's us celebrating after a really great day. That's Omar, who was supposed to be with us today, but had a bit of a family tragedy, so couldn't make it today. We exhibited at the British Museum. We met the Queen, who came to see the work, and met Judy and all the young people, which is fantastic. The young people won the Diana Award for their contribution because they'd go into schools and share their stories and help other young migrants feel like they belonged and stuff like that. So they created great programs for other young people. The book process was incredible. Creating the book was painstaking, and it's something that I really dreamt about doing. I visualized creating, and we did a Kickstarter campaign. Who's done a Kickstarter campaign before ever? A few people? Horrible, isn't it? Are you doing one now? God bless you. I hope it goes well. It is 30 days of literally. That's the only thing you think about, right? You gotta blast people. You gotta spam people and hope, people that you've not talked to in 10 years. You gotta message. I think after that 30-day period, I ended up coming out. I was like, oh my gosh, finally, we got the funding, and then we ended up creating the book. It was like, oh, crazy. But then this is this is them in Turkey, kind of printing some of the pages off, which is so crazy to kind of imagine them printing it off and it being something I wrote and I edited, and I worked with a proofreader to kind of work on. And it was a real process to do it, but I'm so glad I got it done in the end. And then this is it kind of in the kind of, is it proofing stage or something like that, all stacked up, ready to kind of be bound and things like that. And that's the book that we have now, Fear and Dreams, which is all about, and the title comes from a talk that I heard from a migrant, I think he was a refugee actually, African refugee in his 40s, the man that was speaking on a stage. And he said, people move for 2 reasons. They move because of their fears, and they move because of their dreams. I was like, ooh, that's really interesting way to think about it. And if you think about it, we all do that, really. We all move because of something that we're trying to get away from and something we're trying to get towards. And that should also kind of make that so relatable. If your family was in danger, what would you do? We have not been in that situation, most of us. So this book is once again all about listening, understanding, and valuing their contributions and their stories. These are some pages from the books. I'm doing okay, aren't I, Mick? I'm doing okay. He'll tell me. I can slow a little bit. Great. Uh, this is Rakiba. Rakiba is from Syria as well. We've got quite a few Syrians in the book, and she's working. I met her through Quorum as well, and she's the most like wonderful spirit, like calm spirit, wants to help people. She wants to be a science teacher. There's a great vision for her life, Rakiba. We spent a lot of time together, her and I. Once again, met her through, she's the one peeking at the back there, quite shy, but there she is. There's Halil doing this in the back with the camera, like that, Halil, and then Judy's by his side there. So we met, so that wonderful kind of time working with the young people. I just identified people that could be great for the project as well. So I didn't work with everybody. I worked with selected people, you know. So one of the things that I left in the book, one of the last pages is a message: our stories matter, but what we do next, even more so. And it's this idea of seeing your past as something that you are growing from, rather than something that defines who you are. And these young people, they may have come from war-torn areas or had to leave for some reason, but the whole point was that, you know, you have this opportunity to kind of see ahead of yourself and become an inspiration to other people. Dad, like I said, passed away in 2021, but the gift of this project is that from about 2019, I would just sit with him and just talk to him and listen to him and try and understand him, because we didn't have the best relationship, if I'm honest with you. Like, he was a bit of the generation before me, for my generation, especially if they were migrants, they wouldn't share their stories. Like, they just got up and got on with it, right? And there's such a shame, because you don't understand, sometimes you don't understand your own parents. You're like, Dad, why are you so against that thing? Or why are you not supporting me? And things like that. And it took him kind of being really ill for me to be able to sit down and say, okay, I'm just gonna not try and tell you how you should be, but I just want to understand where you came from. And I think that was a really, really, really cathartic thing, because when he did pass away, there was nothing unsaid. There was nothing that I didn't understand. I ended up writing the first chapter of the book about him, you know, which was such a gift that I had for him. So I'm very grateful for that. Now my family can read it and understand a little bit more about the man that was such a driven man in the beginning, but it changed towards the end of his life. And that happens. And I think we're allowed to change. I think if he had the language, the resources that we have today, he would be maybe slightly different. Maybe he would have reached out and things like that. But that's something I can learn from and I can grow from. So yeah, once again, Khalil and Judy, I built such a great relationship with this family. It's like, they're just amazing. Like, Halil's helped me on photo shoots before, because he's into like filmmaking and things like that. He's helped me on photo shoots. And Judy's like doing great with nutrition in university. And like, we just kept really close contact. They came to the book launch in 2022 in December. And we had the young people there and speaking about their projects, which is so much fun. So much fun. And then in March, they invited me to their kind of UK citizenship ceremony. I arrived like 5 minutes late, but it was like, they're like, come in, it's fine. And it was so much fun. They're like, yeah, let's take a picture with you. And it just really kind of is that testimony of like, when you invest in people, right, when you allow them to know that you see potential in people, they're going to rise to that expectation. You know, if you don't expect something from someone, they're not going to rise to, they're going to be like, okay, well, there's no expectation on me. But if you expect people to rise, they're gonna go up to that level, I find anyway. So once again, just to close out with you guys, be a dreamer, seize opportunity, tell stories that are important to you, and that's going to take you so much further than if you're trying to be like another photographer. You're trying to tell stories that maybe don't belong to you. You know, I think if it feels like it connects with your spirit, once again, I'm a bit religious, but if it connects with your spirit in some way and you feel like there's integrity behind it, do it. Like, tell those stories. And when you connect with your subjects, tell them your story first. This is why I'm doing this project. And you're just inspiring to me. I want to tell your story to more people. I think this needs to be shared with the world. And they'll respond to that because you're speaking from a place of real authenticity, right? Loves, listen, understand, value what is being shared with you. Whatever someone shares with you is their truth. Don't try and rewrite it, tell them how they should sound. No, it's their truth. and share the single individual stories. They're more powerful than this happened to 10,000 people. This happened to Sabrina. This happened to Ingrid. This happened to James. That connects with people on a deeper level than if you're trying to tell a wide, broad story of a lot of different things, you know. So although you might photograph a lot of people for a project, really give attention and spotlight to a single story. There's a lot of power in that, I think. And then just to end off there, the Stranger series, Fear and Dreams, is out now, packed with lots of amazing stories in this book, and it's been such a privilege that they've shared so much with me. And through learning more about my father's story, I actually got to relate to them more and say, this was my parents' migrant story, you know.